All right, shalom, shalom. First and foremost, I want to give all praise, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahashim, Yahweh Shai, Bahashim, Rachak Wadash. Double honors to the elder apostles, the elder bishops, the elders of Great Millstone, who rule very well, very beautifully. Double salutations unto the Akim I heard pushing this gospel in truth and in sincerity to the best of their ability, given to them by Yahweh, Bahashim, Yahweh Shai. Peace, blessings, and salutations be unto the elect scattered abroad. May the election of Yahweh, Bahashim, Yahweh Shai, Lord willing, fall upon your houses. This is Brother Quanah Watts from the Arizona Great Millstone Camp. Come back at you, Lord will, with the edifying lesson through the spirit and power of Yahweh, Bahashim, Yahweh Shai, Lord will. It is edifying, Lord will. It is straight to the point. And the scriptures tell us, right, to ultimately be on our watch, right, to be circumspect, like to look and to pay attention, right, to what's going on, right. And as we see, Trump and his administration, going harder, right, when it comes to trying to utilize the military or the National Guard, which ultimately are the same thing, right, to come in on Jake and everything like that, right. We understand that we are in the time of Jacob's trouble, really we're in the time of the last two major prophecies, which is one, Jacob's trouble, which we're in now, right, which is ultimately, getting worse, and it's only going to continue to get worse, right, with Trump, really the Republican Party, right, Trump and his administration, ultimately taking away, what they call democratic programs, right, Section 8, food stamps, WICs, and a plethora of different other things, right, Medicare, Medicaid, right, so on and so forth, which is ultimately going to, again, make things a hell of a lot worse, man, right, which is what we're praying for. We're hoping, we constantly are praying to Yahweh Shemel Shai to speed these things up, to bring this place down, and we're seeing the Lord move, and that second major prophecy, which is to take place immediately after, is World War III, which is brewing as we speak, right? America and Russia, right, we're ultimately going to have, ultimately a peace talks, but that has ultimately been canceled, and there's more threats, right, of a nuclear war ensuing between the two major giants, right? Which is, I came across this article earlier as I was looking for a little bit more information just on the situation between America, and Russia, and I came across this article, which is heavy, right? It says, it's on the Newsbreak app. It says Russia's massive nuclear arsenal in Arctic pointed at U.S., right? Norway, right? It says Russia, and this was posted 12 hours ago, right, from Newsweek. It says Russia is reinforcing its presence at a base in the Arctic Circle, including nuclear weapons pointed towards the United States, according to Norwegian Defense Minister Tor Sandvik, right? So Russia is creating these missiles. They have one that's called the SARS-2 missile, right, or the nickname the Satan-2 missile, right, which is able to hold up to, I think it was like 15 to 20, if I'm not mistaken. It could have been 50, nuclear warheads, which are able to, in Russia came out with a video saying that they can shoot that missile. I think it was 500 miles off of the coast of the UK, and it would create such a big radioactive tidal wave that it would take out half of Europe. Just that one nuclear missile would create that much, damage, and they're mass producing that missile, right? Mass producing, right? Just like, China has the one it's called the 61. From what they call it the 61. It holds 60 nuclear warheads, right, and one hydrogen bomb, which, from my understanding, no other nation has that, but I could be wrong, So these two major powers, which America is ultimately, really messing with both of these nations by, messing with Venezuela, right? Because China has, a lot of, the Venezuelan debt, right? Owns a lot of Venezuelan debt, so that's one of their assets, right? And then, Russia, is an ally of Venezuela, right? Maduro is ultimately threatening to, unleash 5,000 missiles, you know, Russian-made missiles against the U.S. So we understand that these two major powers ultimately have ties with Venezuela, and America's fucking with both of these nations, man. Right? America and China over Taiwan, America and Russia over, the little skirmish that they had with Iran earlier this year, and then also with Ukraine, right? America backing both Ukraine and Israel, you know? So it's ultimately putting these nations, right, in this mindset of, hey, we got to prepare for war, you know? Which, let me grab this in Isaiah, it's like Joel, right? Because we're in the time of war, right? Joel 3 and 9. It says, proclaim ye this among the Gentiles. Prepare war. And these nations are getting ready for war, man, right? It says, wake up the mighty men, let all the men of war draw near, let them come up. Beat your plowshares into swords and your pruning hooks into spears. Let the weak say, I am strong. And this is what we're seeing as well, right? Small countries like Venezuela, right? Even Colombia, right? Pressing up against America, right? These are small countries, man, compared to America, right? Population, military might, so on and so forth, economic power. These nations are really small in comparison to America, man. But these nations are starting to, ultimately look at America and start bucking up, right? And start to ultimately, focus more on their military might, which goes back to those plowshares and pruning hooks, which are agricultural tools, right? Into swords and spears, which are what? Military tools, right? Swords and spears used to kill, right? Which, again, right, they're focusing on their military might, right? Their nuclear power, This is what's going on. It says, assemble yourselves and come, all ye heathen, and gather yourselves together round about, right? And we're looking at these nations ultimately starting to look at America, right, with that side eye. Like, who the fuck do you think you are? Scriptures talk about especially the way that America has been moving and just firing on, these different boats and killing people, and the way that they're moving and threatening, Trump and his administration threatening these different nations and whatnot. Scriptures talk about that his look was more stout than his fellows, which is talking about America, right? Ultimately bucking up and coming up against, even their own allies, man. This is what we're seeing take place even now, right? It says that there caused that mighty one to come down, O Lord, which is talking about the angels coming down, playing on the minds, right, of these different leaders, right, and stirring them back up, just as we read in Ezekiel the 38th chapter and verse 4, it says, and I will turn thee back, right? Turn who back? Turn Russia back, right? To what? That Soviet USSR, that Soviet mindset, right? It says, and put hooks into thy jaws, and I will bring thee forth, and all thine army, horses and horsemen, all of them clothed with all sorts of armor, even a great company with bucklers and shields, all of them handling swords. So the Lord is ultimately having Russia, as well as these other nations, like it says right here, Persia, Ethiopia, and Libya with them, all of them with shield and helmets, and so on and so forth, right? These nations are getting ready for war, right? The Lord is turning Russia right back into that Soviet mindset, which is why now, again, as we're saying, they're reinforcing their presence at the Arctic Circle. It says, Newsweek contacted the U.S. and Danish Ministries of Defense, along with the Russian Foreign Ministry, for comment via email or on Saturday outside of regular office hours. It says why it matters, right? Relations between Moscow and in the West nosedived in February 2022 when Russian President Vladimir Putin ordered his military to conduct a full invasion of Ukraine, and they were dropping in, right? You can go and look up those videos if they're still up. They were dropping in by air, parachute. There was thousands upon thousands upon thousands, of military members being dropped out of airplanes. It was a full-scale invasion, right? It says, sparking the biggest war in Europe since World War II, the biggest war, right, since World War II. Well, guess what? This is the beginning stages, right, of World War III that we're in right now, right? And we're seeing that these tensions and, are starting to boil up, and different, players are coming into, this war, right? Now we got Venezuela. Now we got Colombia, right? Now we got, Iran and Lebanon and Syria, all these different nations are coming into the mix, man. You know, Qatar, right? America fired on Qatar, you know, or it's like, I think Israel fired on Qatar, you know. So you have different players coming into, you know, into the mix now, man, right? And again, it's only going to continue to get worse, right? So this week saw President Trump announce he didn't want a wasted meeting with Putin in Budapest after the Russian leader rejected American and European demands for an immediate ceasefire, right? That peace talk ultimately ended, which there's no peace, right? There's not going to be any peace. They said that there was going to be that he ultimately, you know, signed a deal that would create peace in the Middle East. But 1 Thessalonians 5:3, when they shall say peace and safety, there then sudden destruction come upon them. And we're not in the time of peace, Ecclesiastes 3, right? There's a time, a season, and a purpose to everything under the sun, and we're in the time of war, not a time of peace. You know, it says Trump also introduced a new sanctions package targeting Russian oil giants Rosneft and Lukoil, right? So he's attacking, you know, Russia oil, right? Which we saw this happen, you know, when America was putting sanctions on Russia heavy. I think it was like last year or a few years ago. Biden was, if I'm not mistaken, there was a, you know, it was recently, right, within, you know, the last like 5 years. I think it was Trump, right? He put sanctions on Russia, and all of the European countries, not all of them, but the major ones, like Germany, France, Spain, so on and so forth, right? They ultimately told America that would ultimately, you know, that would affect, right, their economy huge, because about 40 to 50% of the European economy runs off the Russian oil, right? So this right here, right, is going to play a major role in America's allies, you know, ultimately, you know, looking at America, you know, sideways, which is prophesied, right? Revelations was that 16 and 17, you know. We'll just have to ultimately watch and, you know, see how this plays out. So, like, right, it says what to know. It says Sandvik discussed Russia's military situation in an interview with British newspaper The Daily Telegraph that was published on Friday. It says, referring to a region of Russia inside the Arctic Circle near Finland, Sandvik said Russia is building up on the Kola Peninsula, where one of the largest arsenals of nuclear warheads in the world is located. Ooh. It says the nuclear weapons, are not only pointed towards Norway, but towards the UK and over the pole towards Canada and the US. And see, these nuclear weapons, they're not just going to sit there, right? They're not made just to sit there and to ultimately say, hey, I got nuclear weapons pointed at you. If you don't do what I tell you to do, then so on and so forth. No, these nuclear weapons, the Lord Yahweh Shemel Shai had created to do what? To destroy, right? Let's go to that. I had it pulled up in Isaiah chapter 54 and verse 16, right? Behold, I have created the smith that bloweth the coals in the fire. And these go back to these nuclear scientists, right? Just these scientists that are ultimately splitting these atoms, creating these different bombs, and more importantly, the nuclear bomb, right? The ICBM nuclear bombs, right? Doing what they got to do, and then ultimately putting, you know, that in the reaction, right, of those atoms being split, so on and so forth, and basically putting them in a nuclear warhead that, and when those nuclear warheads get used, hey, we're talking about mass devastation, right? In the millions, if not, you know, possibly billions, just one nuclear warhead, right? We don't necessarily know, right, the power of these nuclear warheads until they get used, man, right? And ultimately the destruction is televised, and see, it will be. You know, everyone is going to know about the destruction of America, because see, that's what these nuclear missiles are going to be used for, right? To destroy America. As it says right here, behold, I have created the smith that bloweth the coals in the fire, and that bringeth forth an instrument for his work, and I have created the waster to destroy. See, this is what their intent is, right? This is what the Lord Yahweh Shemel Shai had these nuclear scientists create these missiles for, right? So that they can destroy what? Destroy America mainly. You know, it's that's why he has Russia pointing the nuclear missiles at America, right? Even though it says the UK, America and UK are at they're basically partners, right? America and Canada, right? Recently been having feuds, but so there's a little bit of bit of feud, whatnot, right? Tariff, going back and forth with America and Canada, but nonetheless, America and Canada are allied, you know. But America is the number one target, right, for most of these nuclear missiles, man. Right, because of the wickedness and the evil that America has ultimately pushed onto the earth. You know, let's grab this real quick. And Amos. Oh, what is that? Amos 9:8. Right? It says, Behold, the eyes of the Lord Yahweh shall shine upon the sinful kingdom. That sinful kingdom is talking about America. This is why America has all these chariot sightings, because you have all these angels, which are the eyes of the Lord, coming and visiting this place, basically taking those notes and sending them straight up to Yahweh Shemi Shai. You know? And the Lord is ultimately, seeing all this shit. Right? Scriptures say that his eyes are 10,000 times brighter than the sun, beholding the good and the evil. The Lord sees everything that's going on. You know? And sees that America is the epicenter of wickedness and evil in the world. Right? Which is why this place has to be destroyed. Which is why we're glad when we see this kind of news that Russia's pointing nuclear missiles, the largest nuclear missile, whatever you want to call it, reserve or arsenal, right, in the world, pointed at America. Like, call all Yahweh Shemel Shah, man. Right? We're just waiting waiting for that point that the Lord basically has, that army, that nuclear army ready, and Jacob's trouble pops off to where they're going to be used. We can't wait, right? It says, and I will destroy it from off the face of the earth, saving that I will not utterly destroy the house of Jacob, saith Yahweh. So the Lord's finna destroy this place, man. America is the sinful kingdom. America is going to be destroyed, man, and we see it, right? We see it coming, right? It says, and I'll read a little bit. There's really not too much more on here. I guess I'll read a little bit and then we'll close out. It says, referring to a region of Russia inside the Arctic Circle near Finland, Sandvik said Russia is building up on the Kola Peninsula, where one of the largest arsenals of nuclear warheads in the world is located. The nuclear weapons, are not only pointed towards Norway, but towards the UK and over the pole towards Canada and the US. He continued, we are the eyes and ears of NATO in this area, and we see that they're testing new weapons, for example, hypersonic missiles, and they're testing nuclear-driven torpedoes and nuclear warheads. They're testing them, right? Getting them ready, right? Why would they be testing them if they're not going to use them eventually? That would just be, a waste of time. And see, the Lord Yahweh Shemel Shah is not wasting any time. This is all for, all these different drills we've been seeing between these different nations throughout the years. The Lord is gearing these nations up for war, right? It says, Russia bases nuclear weapons on the Kola Peninsula along with its Northern Fleet, which was established in 1733. Just talking about other. Yeah, we'll read this last little part. The rest you can go back and, ultimately read, but I just want to grab this a little bit. It says, what happens next, right? It says, Moscow shows little sign of winding down its war in Ukraine, meaning tensions with the rest are likely to remain high, particularly if Kyiv is given access to more advanced weapon systems such as Tomahawk missiles, which, again, that is ultimately going to, add, to the issue as well, because, those Tomahawk missiles are nuclear capable, which Russia is saying, this is ultimately a step, towards, making things worse, and not no peace, or no ceasefire or anything like that, right? It's only adding fuel to the fire, which, again, call law Yahweh Shem El Shah, because we're looking down the barrel of World War III, right? We're already in Jacob's trouble, right? We're seeing it, building up. We're seeing these things that are about to happen through the spirit, right? Starvation, people, second Ezra to 15th chapter, second Ezra to 16th chapter, right around the corner, right? But at the same time, we're looking at World War III, it's all right around the corner, man, But I'll go ahead and close out with this in Revelations 11 and 14, quick, simple, oldie but goodie, right? This Revelations 11 and 14, the second woe is past, and behold, the third woe cometh quickly, right? The second woe is World War II, and the third woe is World War III, and it's coming, right? So with that, Lord will is edifying, Lord will straight to the point. I want to give all praise, honor, glory to Yahweh, Bahashim, Yahweh Shah, Bahashim, Rachak, Wadash, double honor to the elder apostles, the elder bishops, the elders, the great millstone. The next time I say Shalom.